Hello.
Hey, hey ladies, great to see you. So I'm very happy to be here today with you and to get a chance to record this podcast with you. That's the first of the time, and I really love the idea. So let's see how it gets. But maybe to give our audience some background information about us, about who we are and how we got there. We're basically three friends, three ladies who have a few things in common. The first thing is obvious when you listen to me. We're all French speaking, our mother tongue at least. We all live abroad, we're all expats, and we're all freaks when it comes to data. We basically work, feed, share, and love data in all potential and possible ways. Before we take a deep dive into the topic we have today, which is data storytelling, I'd like to maybe invite you both to tell us a little bit about yourself, and I will also, of course, share a bit more about myself then.
Okay.
Okay, I can go first. Okay. Yeah, so I'm Ghizlane. First of all, I'm happy to be here with you, Myriam and Marie, to talk about this passionate topic, data storytelling. So I come from a customer experience background, so basically a consultant and a trainer in customer experience. I have behind me around 12 years of experience in corporate, so in global companies.
And I'm Myriam Jessier, so also native French speaker. I'm also a consultant and trainer. That is something we all have in common here. But I'm more interested in the search end of things. So everything that has to do with search engines and data, but more on the web analytics side. So I'm a Google Analytics 4 trainer, Google Tag Manager trainer, and I look at the data from a very technical standpoint at the end of the day.
Thanks, ladies. And I'm Mario Zur. I'm a UX researcher by profession, a trainer, tutor, and mentor for people who enter the field of UX or want to grow their career in UX. But what brought us together today and the topic we're going to talk about is the fact that in our respective field and industry, we deal with data to make a point, to have an impact, to deal with stakeholders, and we have very different approach yet very similar issues. I think we can state it like that. And if I may start with a rather bold idea or principle, which is my own conclusion, and I know that's how we started this conversation initially, it's that data alone don't work, basically, against all odds and what we learn and we would love to believe, data simply won't cut. If you want to make a point, if you want to convince your stakeholders to take a decision or to move towards a certain goal, you can't just bring data. And I know it's not very intuitive when you talk about people whose job it is to gather insights and to feed in data, but this is the sad truth. What's your take on that, ladies?
So on my end, I identify the problem similarly to you, but I have a specific sentence I tell people that we collect a lot of data. So much data that we could drown in it. But it's not because you collect a lot of data that you are able to tell good stories with that data. And those stories help you move the project forward. So if you want to actually accomplish what you want to accomplish, data is something that is more of an asset, a leverage. It is not the silver bullet. It's not the presenting numbers is not the thing that's going to make humans go, yes, I'm making a rational, informed decision based on the data you're showing me raw. It doesn't work that way. We're humans and we really like a good story to convince us, hey, this is the right way, this is the safe way. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's pretty aligned with what you're saying because even I'm sure you have heard about all these people who studied even the brain, the human brain. You when you hear stories, there is this part of the brain that is actually activated, which is very much related. I think they call it primal brain or something. So it's different than the conscious brain, which will be more processing the information, trying to understand what's going on. The primal brain will be more responsible for actually taking the action and memorizing and being motivated. So this part cannot be activated without the storytelling, right? And this is pretty general. I think it's not only about the data, but it's about storytelling in
I really
general.
love that you picked this topic and that you point out at the brain, because this is maybe what gets me the most excited in my line of work, is studying how people think, take decisions, and process information. And that's the exact point indeed. We like to believe that we are rational people in individuals, and that we think through our decisions, but nothing could be more untrue or false. We are absolutely not rational, and this has been proven. And the way I came to this conclusion, I think, like many of us, is by learning on my own fault, basically getting beautifully designed and very accurate data in a presentation, going into this with my full hopes that I'm gonna make a huge impact and point, and realizing that the only thing I was getting was basically a massive snooze factor. People like literally checking their phones, fidgeting in their seats, and having absolutely no interest whatsoever for the data I was presenting. And that's when I realized, okay, there must be something about that. My data is not false. I don't think I'm too bad at presenting. So what is it? Basically, why can't I make my point? And I got to literally study how people, or research how people take decisions. And in fact, decision making is very tied to an emotional state. So people basically will
Yes.
connect with, their underlying beliefs, values, own experience. And when a stakeholder starts from a biased, obviously, and unconscious point of view, and you come with data that doesn't anyhow connect to this or correlate their underlying belief, let's say, it's just like a massive clash. And rather than provoking a thought process, at best an interrogation, you may trigger reluctance, basically, to accept the fact. So it's really, really interesting, and it's proven actually that you do need to connect with the underlying belief and emotions.
And
Yeah. So sorry, Miriam, go ahead.
um, on my end, it's I come from a different side. So for me, I'm in my little nerd corner, and people expect me to do these technical setups and to come with data, and they don't even understand the data, and they pay me to talk about the data they don't understand and don't really care about, as long as I get stuff done. That's it. So
Mhm.
for me,
Mhm.
the way I explain it is that when I create SEO reports, for example, the visual representation of data can make or break the clarity and the impact that I'm expecting to have. So this is something where when you're on the technical end, sometimes you will look up and realize that nobody in the room understands how important the stuff is. And this
Mm.
is a different problem for me. So I have lived through what you described, but there's also a need to bridge the gap between the granular metrics that I have and the overarching business objectives. And this is where a lot of people in my field drop off.
Mm.
Connecting the data to the bigger story. And the best way to go about it is to use the right data, but also explain why it's the right data and what it means to people in a way that they can connect to.
I think the data, yeah, I relate very much to what you're saying, Miriam, because like in the CX field, basically, I have experienced moments where I was making reports about what customers, of course, are giving as a feedback, what can be improved, etc. And you have a big difference between sending out a reporting with facts, because this will be more touching the logic of people. So okay, these are facts, and so what, right? And then you have a completely different dynamic when you will make a story out of it and present it, and people will relate to it. So basically, the story will bring the emotion, right? So what I tend to do usually, so I try to avoid basically just being on the informative level of things and just saying, sending reports and say, hey, this is the latest monthly report of this and that. But I try to bring people around the table, like our stakeholders, and say, okay, this is what we have as facts. This is the story behind it. And concretely, this will look like, for example, I would use some colors, some shapes, some contrast. Really, I want to capture attention of and curiosity of people. It happens sometimes that I would use really very impactful feedback from a customer that will really like create this oh moment, right? What are we gonna do now? For the audience, they feel really concerned and feel the sense of this is urgent. We need to take action.
I I have to jump in because you said something that, ooh, this is my world. So one of the issues that you touched upon is how to choose the right colors, how to think about what it looks like. And what most people don't understand is this matters a lot. It's not just about building the thing, it's about really making sure it has a shape, because more accessible reports lead to more pertinent questions asked by stakeholders. It leads to engagement. And one of the issues that everybody skates around is color. But color blindness is statistically more prevalent in men. And you know who happens to be statistically more prevalent in the C suite? Yes. So, all I'm going to say about that is that color is a powerful tool in visual communication when it's used effectively. It can greatly enhance comprehension, but also retention. The problem is, we don't think about that.
I love that. And you just used the word that by me, for me, is so important, communication. That's something, I mean, in my line of work, that's something you're not taught. You're not even close to be encouraged to develop that skills. Communicate. Communicate for clarity, communicate for engagement, communicate for passion, communicate for emotion. Because that's where you will trigger this chemical work by your audience to say, oh, there is something there for me. That's interesting, that's understandable. I need to take action. And I come from marketing, and that's something that I learned. I was trained to pitch, to present, to tell a story, to develop a storyline, to engage my stakeholders around this is the KPI, but let me tell you a story. This is how we place this product. This is what our audience is looking for. And when I came to UX, my first initial thought was that this is no longer what I'm doing, right? I'm on the good side of the force now. And I need to think about users only and to argue with facts because this is a scientific approach. And that's absolutely not true. That doesn't work. And if there is one thing I'd like to encourage people to do is to get inspired by the best storytellers. Look around. How did Apple become Apple? What did they manage to do? They didn't sell the best product. They sold a story.
Let me tell you what they
Yeah.
managed to do. It's not even tied to Apple, is that Steve Jobs got involved with Pixar. Some of the most amazing storytellers out there. They trained him to get
Yes.
really good. This
Yep.
is very important. This is the bit nobody talks about. And you made me realize why I have a different take on things. I realize I don't come from marketing. My diplomas are in communication and sociology. And this is maybe why this has mattered to me a lot more than some of my peers that are just discovering data storytelling matters. So, yes.
Yes, I think what makes people a good data storytellers in general, because definitely either they were trained, as you said, by other people who are really good at it, or they have a background that require the storytelling at some point. For example, you're mentioning you have a background in psychology, and so you need to say stories, right? Same for me. For example, I have done a master's in journalism and public relations and business communication. So it's all about stories, right? But if I can add something, I think there is another layer when you talk about telling stories with data is authenticity. I think it's very important. Let's say we have the same data, the three of us, but the way we will say the story will be different, right? Because every one of us is different, has a different way of saying things. And I think it's very important in the corporate world where you're putting your authentic side on the story when you're telling it, because I think it builds that kind of trust with the audience. And I think it makes, for the simple reason is that people can spot very quickly when you're insincere, right? When you're trying to make up things and say, okay, everything is great. You don't need only to talk about successes, but also about failures. Yes. So then the audience is really can relate even more, and makes it even more powerful as a message.
To me, you're describing the key difference that a lot of people struggle with when it comes to understanding what data driven means and what data informed
Mm,
means. Data driven means that you're running after your data. It's this ideal state where all the data is very clean, trustworthy, and you can like make rational decisions upon it. That's not what happens. So at best, what we should aim to be is data informed. We let the data inform our decisions, and data can be qualitative and quantitative. It's not just this like, like big data rush where we just trust the machine. It's not about that, because we know that while this is going on and machines are handling a lot more data than we do, there needs to be a human at the end of the day that looks at this and goes, what does this mean to us? Why does this matter?
yeah.
And this leads me into I have to bring that side to the conversation, but data visualization pitfalls. If you don't have the right tools to help you along, this is going to be a problem. So I have 5 big ones. Many of the people that I work with or train will run into some of these issues. They overcomplicate things. So you end up with a really complex chart where you're like, I need an IKEA manual for this one chart. That
Mhm.
doesn't work. It needs to ensure it doesn't confuse your audience. That's step one. It's the basic one, but step one. Step two, trying to cram as much data as you can is going to be overwhelming. Once again, like the chart doesn't have to be complex, but also don't overstuff it. And choosing the wrong chart is very often a problem.
Mhm.
Ignoring the context. You're gonna drop this and go, here's the fine, and you're like,
Fine.
I've seen a colleague of mine do that about 10 years ago, and the client was like, so you didn't ask us about the context and you didn't think about this. And I was like, I told you this would be a problem. Data without context can mislead. So you need to
Mm,
make anything that is a big change apparent. Oh, is this caused by seasonality? Say so, give context. And poor labeling and legend placement. If we have to struggle to figure out what's going on by doing this or doing that or getting closer or looking at it from far away, you haven't done your job. This is bad. These are all my pet peeves. Sorry, I had to like bunch them up, but
I
I'm
love,
done now.
Ma'am, I love that because what you're describing here is the UX of data, basically. There
Yeah.
is user experience of data. It needs to be recognizable, findable, learnable. useful,
Mm.
useful, and there are so many aspects to it that you could actually list down in a few key KPIs for your data. If you want your data to tell the right story and to actually trigger some decision or action, you need to make it consumable for your audience. And that's literally thinking of how will they use it.
I'm
Mhm. I experienced the same thing with the, sorry, Miriam, with context. If I can give an example, like I tend to, I mean, in as a CX professional, basically, you are continuously understanding the experience of customers at different stages of the journey, right? But then when you measure, for example, the customer satisfaction of a customer 3 months after purchase, post-purchase, you can imagine that the level of satisfaction would be higher than if you do it 3 years later with the same product, right? Here the context is more a time context, but obviously after 3 years, the customer had his product broken several times, he fixed it, he had time to evaluate his expectation versus the value he received. He's not anymore in this euphoria of I got it new, it's amazing. And so if you only change the time when you're capturing and gathering this data, it makes a huge difference in the value, right? So I think the context is very important. And of course, there are different ways of contextualizing, as you said. This is just one of
But
them,
it's so
right?
essential because that's something I have seen too many times happen, both in marketing and in UX. You take a number, you take a graph, and you just exploit it and blow it up. Like this is the big number we have, and then you're like, yeah, well, when are we measuring that in what context?
Mm.
oh, you're describing my LinkedIn timeline. Out of context graphs by marketers saying they're awesome.
Right.
It's nonstop.
And this is dear to me because that's the very core of my job. I mean, UX is all about having the right data from the right audience in the right moment. It's just as simple as
Mm.
that. This is the core of my business.
I've been sitting on this for a few minutes, but I have to say that I love the concept of the UX of data. And
Mhm.
I think that we should get our name from this, or at least name something like this. That sounds amazing, okay? I had never thought about it this way before, simply because I'm too busy teaching and training people saying, please don't do this. And the one pet peeve that I have about this is going, please don't use a pie chart. Like that's my one thing, and I can explain why from a neurobiological standpoint. I can explain it from like a pure visual standpoint, but at the end of the day, humans always go back to the pie chart. There's this allure, there's this desire to just show pies
Move.
everywhere.
The
Simple is
traditional
move.
classic way.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just gonna pick up on something you mentioned before. Is that data can be qualitative and can be also quantitative. I mean, I would say it has to be
Yes,
both.
Yeah.
yes,
I am struggling all the time. I'm a big fan, and Marie knows it, of a mixed method
Mhm. Yeah.
approach because I have always the feeling that if you give the quantitative perspective, something is missing is the
yes.
why. And if you give the qualitative part, you're not validating your data because you're just picking up what is happening and why, but to which extent we don't know. So it's very important to have those two in, and this is also part of the context, right? So we want to understand what are all the elements around the results that we are presenting.
Exactly. You need to know what you measure and to which extent and for what are you aiming at, right? If you're only willing to understand why something happens, then going full qualitative makes sense. If you just want to identify what is happening, then quantitative will work. Now, if you go further than that, and that's where, to be a bit nerdy, an insight will be generated, a real insight. It's going beyond the why and what, but connecting the dots, being able to say when this happened, then this is triggered, and that happens to this extent, and that's why it happens. Then only you are informed. You have this ability to tell this story like we got the whole picture. We understand what's happening. We understand when it happens, why it happens. Now we can take action on that.
And I
And this is why, Miriam, we like to work with you guys in analytics from the customer experience perspective, because we're bringing more what people think, right? As a, we bring in the perception of the customer. But sometimes what the customers say
is not what they want or do.
or think is not what. So what he does is basically, this is what you're holding as a resource. We know from you guys in analytics, the customer has done this, he bought this at this time, and he behaved that way. So if you don't gather, but we will tell you why he did that, right? So working together, and this is most of the time the challenge in many companies, is this silos that we need to break between the two teams to get this eventually this big picture that you're
There's a
talking
technical
about.
part of this that is also important. That's something I noticed because I work with a lot of UX researchers, and I bring this confidence that is statistical. So when you tell a story, sometimes the person listening to the story is looking for ways to either better understand or find a thread to unravel the whole story because it doesn't sound like something they want to hear. And
Mm.
when you are able to articulate confidently, like, this is where the data is coming from, this is what it actually means. Are you looking for this extra bit of data? I can get it out for you. And here's how. There's this confidence of we know what we are talking about. We're not just throwing numbers to convince you. This has been a process. So I noticed that when you have that quantitative confidence, people pay attention a bit more. And I don't think it's fair, but it is something that I noticed. And
I can tell you why it's not fair, because quantitative data in terms of, let's say, behavior doesn't tell you if the customer is loyal from the attitudinal point of view. He's
I agree.
behaviorally loyal, which
I agree.
means that step out anytime. So it doesn't give you the perspective of the real retention and why the customer is staying with you. It just says probably he's sticking around just because the switching costs are too high. He doesn't want to go somewhere else. And this is not real loyalty, right?
Yep.
So you need to get a sense of the attitudinal part, which comes from the customer perception, plus the behavioral part, to get that real, loyal, dedicated customers who you want to target as advocates, who you want to use as ambassadors, etc. So.
I love what you were pointing at. And Myriam, you told something that really triggered something by me. And I know I'm always getting a bit nerdy about this communication. And I need to understand, to dig into the why, what's happening. And there is something, you maybe came across this image, this triangle with logos, pathos, and ethos. Like, it's been around forever, right? It's from ancient Greek. And what we learned is that people in rhetoric are receptive to this triangle. You need to state a fact, but you also need to have a higher deal of truth or value, and you need to trigger this pathos, this emotional part. So, the thing is that, in fact, we know it all. We have had all the theory for centuries, but it's kind of got lost along, I don't know, time,
because
technology.
we've been focusing on different things and trying to pretend that as we evolve and progress in terms of technology, that we somehow are more rational, but we haven't changed as humans. And ultimately, if I had to wrap this up, the key takeaway is that the visual processing is that we do when we look at these data stories it's often much more instinctual than analytical. Our brains appreciate, like the visual segmentation of data really fast. But because we process this visually so fast, this means that we may not capture all the nuances that we would need to. It's also tied to our internal CPU. Our working memory is trying to figure out these visuals, and it's not always doing the best job. So think I think if we had to recap what we talked about, what was the most important, the most impactful for you, Ghislaine?
I think there are 3 points. The first one is the context. Definitely, you need to have context for the data. And it can be covered with different in different areas. So looking at what are the external factors that are influencing the values. Is it at which point of time did we measure this, etc. So we have different ways, or comparing similar values or other values that could actually even amplify these values. So it's very important to contextualize. The second point I would say, which we talked about, is the emotions. I think emotions are very important to include, to infuse in the data story to make it relatable, because this is the human part of it, right? And then the authenticity that I mentioned before, I think it's very important for trust, to build trust with the audience. You need to be authentic. You need to believe in what you're saying. Yes, and that's
I
it.
I love this. What about you, Mario?
I love the fact that that's something that struck me a while ago, but I really love these conversations we're having because, from my standpoint, it's like we're gaining so much clarity and power when we work together. We come from different field of expertise, we focus on different things, but in the end, everything correlates and makes sense. And for me, the big breakthrough that I have learned at my own expenses is literally this user experience of the data. Or if you don't want to go so specifically into the UX, let's just put it like that, the experience of data. Like, think about whom you're talking to. Um, we are communicators, we are social animals, so we need to consider what am I trying to communicate to this person, but the person who receives this information, where does this person come from, where do they stand, what's their emotional state, their, sorry for the nerdy things, their cognitive ability to process this information, right? Where do they come from? And then you adapt your communication. So that's, for me, something I absolutely love digging into, and a really, really nice to see this coming together, this whole story literally coming together from our three perspectives.
So, for me to wrap up, it's more accessible reports lead to more pertinent questions from stakeholders. And this helps you move your project along. And at the end of the day, that's all you're trying to achieve with the data that you present. So, I'm really excited and I look forward to the next episode.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Looking
Thank you,
forward
guys.
to the
Have
next
a good
one.
day.
Bye. See you soon, folks.
Bye.
Bye.